world. They self-gaslight themselves. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. They self-gaslight. Those are the words as we go live from Mr. Peter Lavelle in Moscow. They self-gaslight themselves. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Duran Live 41. If you guys hear me, let me know in the chat. Let me know if the sound is good. Let's see who's checking in for this live number 41. We've got Olivia. Hello, Olivia. How are you? We've got, let's see, Nick, Scott, and we've got Michigan, Jay Krubug. Hello, Mary, Wisconsin. Molly, good morning from Harper's Ferry. Hello, Molly, how are you? Pam McCoy, morning from Rileyville, Virginia. Great to have you here, Pam. David from Purgatory. All right, Joanna. Live from Poland. Jeanette from Staffordshire. Lavender from Victoria. Let's see, Tom, Canada. Alex from Austria. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our live.
I just got a notice we're live. That's nice. That's nice.
Thank you. You got an email?
Yeah. Thank you, YouTube. Wow. Surprise.
There you go. There you go, guys. And when people say YouTube is censoring people, come on. All right. All right, guys. Welcome to our live. Belgium, Australia, Thailand, Ohio, Youngblood. Loud and clear. Thank you, Youngblood. Okay, Alexander, the Oracle of London in London. How are you doing, Alexander?
I'm very well, drinking from my new Duran mug. This one has the Alpha Force on it, the Russian Special Forces unit. And of course, I've now got another one, which is with the Kremlin's crest. This is the one that Putin has. But this is my absolute favorite now because it's got one of my great heroes on it, who's Mr. Lavrov, who I think is the greatest foreign minister in my lifetime, without exception. I mean, he's a diplomat of genius. And since we do talk so much about diplomacy, how much more appropriate than to have a mug with his face on it.
And they're dual purpose. You can drink vodka out of them too.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I've drunk beer. I should try champagne also, actually. I think champagne would work really well, actually, at least. Yeah.
We should branch out to Duran caviar. Think about that. Okay.
Well, indeed.
We're trying tea, but I'm looking for a supplier. So if anyone's out there, supplies tea, hit me up. Yeah. We have in Moscow the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk. Peter, how are you doing? You said it's monsoon season.
Yeah, it's been a wet summer, unfortunately. It rained cat and dogs coming here, and I had to change my clothes. I got soaked to the bone, so it's hard rain and cold. So we're all nice and warm now, and we're going to continue with a good conversation. I heard Purgatory. That's liberalism central. So let's talk about it, okay?
Let's talk about Purgatory. But first, Alexander, let's talk about the death of neoliberalism. You sent me an article from FT, Financial Times, where the word that the author wrote about Putin and his gang are the axis of illiberalism. Is that correct, right, Alexander? Go into that article.
That is the title of the editorial. And if you believe the editorial, there is a sort of axis of illiberalism. In other words, a kind of right-wing international controlled by Moscow, whereby the Kremlin runs Salvini, Marine Le Pen, Nigel Farage, Viktor Orban, the AfD in Germany, Gert Winters, presumably in the Netherlands. You name it, they're all puppets of the Kremlin.
We got Brazil in there too. Yeah,
Brazil, and of course, I forget the major example, who must be Donald Trump. But can I just say, it specifically deals with Europe. And actually, if you read that editorial, it's quite sinister, because it says, well, we accept that these people deny that they're all connected to the Kremlin. And we accept that there's no proof, actually, no actual evidence that they are connected to the Kremlin. But intelligence agencies believe they are. So therefore, that is in itself reason to think they must be. I mean, that's what that editorial says. And that's in the Financial Times, which is, of course, one of the big financial newspapers, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. Those are the two newspapers that the business world reads in the English-speaking world. So there you go. That's the axis of liberalism.
Yes, and it's self-gaslighting. That's all it is self-gaslighting. You imagine something and then you say it's real, even though you know you're imagining. This is what we've gotten down to. Liberalism has failed. It worked for the elites. It failed for everybody else. That's pretty simple. That's what he said in his interview. It's not controversial. It's not controversial at all.
What is extraordinary about that interview, Peter, is that it's still being written about here in Britain. You still get articles appearing in The Guardian, the Financial Times, the Telegraph, trying to prove that Putin was wrong. I mean, the poor man himself, you know, he was asked about these comments in a press conference, and he said, I never imagined that these comments in this very long interview, these you know, the comments that I made, you know, off the top of my head, would be taken so seriously. And yet here in Britain, people are still stressing and worrying about it. You know, if you are a Guardian person, it's really bizarre to read, actually.
Peter, it's not only Britain. In Canada, Krista Freeland, the foreign minister, said that liberalism will defeat Putin and his ilk. What do you make of that?
I mean,
this is the
really
war. You know, we did a video today, Peter.
I really don't care what people like that think. Go ahead.
But this is the struggle to them. This is the struggle.
Yeah, well, liberalism is failing and has failed a lot of people. So why don't you fix it? Okay. I mean, the thing is that these people are ideologically possessed, and they have their religion, their God, their church, are all surrounded by this sect-like behavior, and they have no capacity to look inward, to have some self-reflection. All right. You know, I could go on and on. They want open borders, but they have their gated communities. They're against guns, but their bodyguards are packing heat. Okay. They want to have a welfare state, but everybody else pays for it. They don't. When I mean by welfare state, the new Green Deal, okay, which basically is the nationalization of the economy. Okay, that means limited choices, government control. The government decides what you have, what choices you have. I mean, I'm open to talking about separate plans. Okay, you know, this universal wage. I mean, I've seen some actually interesting ideas about it. Okay, that doesn't just give wholesale control to the government. All right. I mean, that's why we're on the other side. We don't we don't gaslight ourselves. We look at things on an individual basis and base it on its merits. Okay. Intuitively speaking, I mean, it's almost impossible to have some kind of right-wing nationale, because that's not how these people think. Okay, they think in terms of sovereignty. Urban isn't really particularly concerned about Russia's sovereignty. Okay, he's not. He's worried about the sovereignty of the people that voted for him in Hungary. So, I mean, the Financial Times, I mean, they're just hallucinating. This is a grand hallucination, because they're losing. They have to find a reason why they're losing. It's not because they're not virtuous, it's that the rest of us aren't. It's the people that have no virtue that are destroying their virtuous idea. It's ridiculous. They're talking among themselves. This is another stage of degradation where only the elites talk among themselves. They don't care what we think. They talk down to us. We're deplorables, all right? They've learned nothing from Brexit. They've learned nothing from the election of Donald Trump.
Alexander, they're now going after Salvini in Italy. Give us the backstory there. What's going on?
Well, this is exactly it, because, of course, it comes back to the points that Peter was making, that, in fact, instead of looking at the problems that are piling up around them, they instead fight a ghost. They fight a ghost in the form of this international, this new right-wing international, which doesn't exist. And the problems Salvini is having in Italy are the attempts to try to fabricate a case that around him that somehow fits him inside this non-existent international. So one of his aides meets with some Russian business people. There's some discussions that apparently lead nowhere, and this is somehow proof that Salvini is being financed by the Russians. And Salvini says this is simply not true. There's no real evidence of that. There is no evidence of that other than this conversation, as I said, which went nowhere. And yet we have demands right across the European media and on the left of the Italian political spectrum to have Salvini and the Northern League, which he leads, investigated on what is really no evidence at all, connecting him, to, as I say, to something that doesn't exist. And I think in Italy, by the way, where people are politically very sophisticated. Italy is a complicated society, but if you talk to Italians for any length of time, they have an incredibly cynical view about politics. They can see right through the nonsense that this is, and it's not actually dented Salvini's popularity in the slightest. But in other countries, of course, in the United States, in Britain to some extent, people believe it. I mean, I've encountered people who are convinced this is true, who are convinced that the Brexit referendum was lost because of Moscow's gold. I mean, you know, if you spend your time reading The Guardian, for example, you could easily come away with that kind of theory. And again, there's all these attempts to try and link people like the businessman Aaron Banks, who partly funded the Leave campaign, to Russia, which have led nowhere. But that doesn't prevent these people from looking.
Yeah. Call in Robert Mueller. Maybe Italy can use him, okay? Get another bite at the apple of Russiagate.
Peter from Reckless Abandon, Ukrainian Nazis are going after Salvini after Italian police found a giant illegal arms dump. So they've got the Ukrainian neo-Nazis, the Nazis that they funded, the EU and the US, are now going after Salvini because they're calling Salvini a fascist.
You know, I encourage everyone to go and check out Moon of Alabama. They have a fascinating story on how fake news is generated. We had some Italian neo-Nazis were found in Italy with very sophisticated military hardware, very sophisticated. And the way the Financial Times and the Moon of Alabama chronicles it really very well, because they kept track of every time they made a change. The FT cannot figure out which side the fascists would fight on in Ukraine, and they kept flip-flopping back and forth. In the Donbass, no, in Ukrainian-controlled Ukraine, and it's absolutely hilarious, and it shows what they want is they want to somehow stick dirt on Russia and anything related to Russia. They don't care about the facts, how they build up to it. So obviously the person that was writing this doesn't understand the slightest thing about the dynamics of the conflict inside of Ukraine. Because it's the people of the Donbass that are victims of foreign fascists going to Ukraine for essentially it's basically a murder expedition. They actually say that you can come to Ukraine and shoot people, and there are people that like to do that. Okay, and they've been examples from Sweden all through Europe. They go to Ukraine. The thing is that what makes this story really scary is what were these guys doing with this military hardware, and how did they get it to Italy? So I mean, this shows if you want to see a conspiracy, there's something going on there. So the FT is totally confused about what's going on in Ukraine, something that we talk about almost on a passé basis, because we follow it very, very carefully and with detail, with supporting facts. Here you have a major journal screwing it up from the get-go, and they keep changing. They change the paragraphs. They add things. They put it back in. They don't know what's going on. That's why people come to listen to us.
Yeah. Can I just say something about that? Because there is actually a rather sinister twist to this story. Because what happened was that the Italian police initially published a statement which says unequivocally these people were fighting on the Ukrainian side against the people who are called the separatists, in other words, the militia in the Donbass, the people who are supposedly backed by Russia. That's what the Italian police said. Then, as Peter rightly says, you have all these stories appearing in the international media, which gets that the wrong way round, and which implies that, on the contrary, these Nazis were fighting with the militia against the Ukrainian government. And as Peter absolutely rightly says, that makes no ideological sense whatsoever. But what's sinister about this is that, having said unequivocally what these people were actually doing, the police then changed their statement to make it neutral, to simply say that they were fighting in eastern Ukraine without making it clear on whose side these people were fighting. Now, that shows to me the extent to which the police are themselves, the Italian police, or at least this section of the Italian police, are themselves prepared to collude in the fabrication of these stories. Because even though they know, they must know what the truth is, and though they're not prepared to go outright and lie about it, nonetheless, they massage their own statement to make it easier for the international media to continue telling the thing the wrong way round. And I found that extremely disturbing. And at a time when, as I said, Salvini himself is being called a fascist almost every day, one has to wonder whether this isn't also a part of the Italian deep state, and Italy has a huge deep state also working to some extent against him.
And we saw that deep state in action for Russiagate.
Yeah, but we have to realize here again. You know, we were talking about the Epstein case. I mean, there's so many witnesses and supporting factors, actors in what he's doing, and the same thing here. What's going on at the FT? I mean, how many people were writing that story? How many times do they have to change it? Okay, they like I said, they have a narrative they want to prove, and they build towards it, and they did it in such a sloppy way, sloppy and very dishonestly.
Yeah. Well, they can't get the narrative right on Ukraine, so let's set the narrative right. They're trying to divide. They've been trying to divide Ukraine from Russia for years now. But the latest polls, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, the latest polls show that people on the ground in Ukraine, they want to sort this out.
70% something.
They want peace. Go ahead, Peter. Explain exactly what the truth is in Ukraine right now, because the globalists, the elitists, the neoliberals, under Obama, they tried to remove the democratically elected government in Ukraine. They succeeded, and they succeeded, yes. And we've had chaos ever since, and they're still trying to divide Ukraine from Russia. But the polls tell a different story. What's going on in Ukraine?
Well, it's with the election of Zelensky, which is very, very interesting, because he did not run on a Russophobic platform, and that was very much welcomed. He even, in some constituencies, even spoke Russian, which is a big deal considering what's happened since the Maidan coup. Now, Zelensky he's trying his best without burning himself. It's July 21st that they have parliamentary elections. Party, a servant of the People Party, his party, is doing very well in the polls. And so there are some tepid attempts to kind of reach out, and they're being smacked down. There was a case where there was a Russian news outlet and a Ukrainian one, and they wanted to have some kind of people's bridge and talk. You know, I mean, on a very, let's talk about your families, and how you're doing and your aspirations. Try to keep politics out of it. Well, forces in Kiev smacked that down instantly, and Zelensky had to do an about face, which was quite embarrassing because he's very new into his administration. He can't. He has the same people that Poroshenko has. He can't get rid of the people that surrounded Poroshenko. So he's very much isolated. Now, if he does well in the parliamentary elections, he's going to have a lot more power and maneuver, because the presidency in Ukraine has gone left and right, upside down and inside out about what powers it actually has. In its current iteration, it's quite weak. But if he gets a good parliamentary win, then he's going to have some leverage here. But also, Zelensky is constantly looking over his shoulder, not at necessarily his political rivals. There's literally really not real politics in Ukraine. It's about these strong very powerful oligarchs that control the levers of power. They're the ones that are calling the shot. So Zelensky has called for meeting Putin, but he wants to be chaperoned by Merkel, May, believe it or not, May. Maybe she'll have some free time soon. Maybe she could do that. Macron, I think even Donald Trump. So I mean, so he needs to be chaperoned because and you have to understand his political position. He has to look over both sides of his shoulder, really. That's not an easy one, and he's a real amateur at this. You know, it's still early days, but institutionally speaking and power-wise, the deck is stacked against him. But 70-something people polled want this resolved, okay? And this gives him an opportunity. How he is able to marry his politics with public opinion, that's good. We're going to see if he has any political skill whatsoever. He should be able to do it. It's early days, though.
Alexander, what do you think?
Yes, I think, can I just say, I was actually talking to a British journalist quite recently who's been to Ukraine, a journalist Peter knows, by the way. And this journalist told me that the change of mood in Ukraine is extraordinary. Not so much, I suspect, that people have changed their opinions, but that people who felt very intimidated and were not willing to come out and speak are now doing so. And Zelensky's election seems to have been the catalyst for this, so that the silent majority has suddenly found its voice and is articulating it. Now, when we say that 70% of Ukrainians now want peace with Russia, in a way that somewhat underestimates the reality of this, because Ukraine is a very divided country in sectional terms. So you have Eastern Ukraine, which has never wanted a conflict with Russia and has always been opposed it and has always wanted strong relations with Russia. Then you have a small area in Western Ukraine, which is vehemently opposed to any kind of rapprochement with Russia. And then you have this huge swathe of people in the center who perhaps are the people who most properly are called Ukrainians. They're the people who tend to speak Ukrainian, but who are Orthodox Christians, who are the swing region. And this swing region can
be, I would even say, go as far as bilingual.
Yeah, absolutely, bilingual. This swing region has now swung decisively and overwhelmingly in favor of a peace and rapprochement with Russia. You only have people in this ultra-nationalist region in the far west of Ukraine holding out. And I have to say, I completely agree with everything that Peter has said about how the institutions of power in Ukraine, the parliament still, the government still, the intelligence services, the military, remain under the control of the ultra-nationalists. And these people are still there, and they have guns, and they still pose a very real danger. But they're beginning to look very isolated. It's as if the soul has gone out of the whole Maidan thing, that it's now functioning, if you like, on a kind of automatic motor, that it's beginning to run down. Now, I say that there's no room for complacency. We're dealing with very dangerous and very violent people in Ukraine. We saw that in 2014 with the events on Maidan Square, which was a very violent change of power. We saw that in this extraordinarily violent war that was fought in eastern Ukraine in 2014 and 2015, and which is never completely finished. So these violent people are there, and they are very compromised, and they have blood on their hands, and they must be very frightened. And frightened people are capable of doing many things, but they must sense, even they must sense, that the popular tide is flowing against them. And I think this incident with the two TV stations, the Russian one and the Ukrainian one, that wanted to speak to each other and establish a television bridge, is both a sign of the genuine desire within Ukrainian and indeed Russian society to restore this connection between these two nations. And the very, very fierce reaction shows the extreme nervousness and fear of what is starting to look like a isolated nationalist movement, which still has the guns and still has the power towards any response of this kind. So it could still go either way, but the tide is now shifting.
I feel actually vindicated because I've argued among good friends that have a different view of Ukraine, but I've said that Russia is playing the long game, and that long game is beginning to pay off. We see that with the recent parliamentary elections and the EU elections, where you're having parties now coming out saying that they want to reverse or start thinking about reversing the sanctions, if not dropping the sanctions altogether. And the Ukrainian people too. I mean, the revolutionary fervor is gone. It's gone. And what the ultra nationalists, neo-Nazi elements, they have failed to institutionalize their rule. That's what they're afraid of. That's why they're afraid of this media bridge, because they're not institutionally insulated and solidified. And this bridge concept completely undermines their sense of being in power, because it's the people that want to talk to each other, and they're sick and tired of having the government determine who they can talk to. And the relationship between Ukraine and Russia is like the relationship between England and Scotland. I think that's a fair comparison, okay? I mean, the commonalities are amazing. Certainly there are some differences, but these people in power, these ideologically possessed people, have not been able to completely dismantle that, okay? I kind of look at Ukrainian politics as a straitjacket. At first, it's really tight and you feel hopeless, but now people are beginning to wiggle around and loosen it up a bit, okay? And now they're getting emboldened and they feel that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And I'll finish with this, and I will, again, to my critics, I've said all along, they can change textbooks, they can ban languages, they can tear up churches, you can do all of those things, but these same people can't make the economy run. And at the end of the day, if you can't do that, the rest of it is just fluff and footnotes.
Yes.
All right. Well,
can I just add one very last footnote, which is because Peter brought up the EU. I think there's an extraordinarily interesting straw in the wind about attitudes in the EU, which is that the European Court of Justice, about the most extreme EU institution that you can get, has now declared the sanctions against the former president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was, of course, the president who was overthrown, and his whole team,
and family,
EU sanctions,
and family.
And family, that those sanctions are illegal. Now, those sanctions were imposed on the grounds that Yanukovych was corrupt. And that information about Yanukovych's corruption, of course, came from the Maidan government, the Poroshenko government. And the European Court of Justice has said that this evidence amounts to nothing. It is purely declamatory. It is just statements about corruption. It's not actually evidence of corruption. So all those sanctions have now been lifted. Now, that's got very little publicity here in Britain. I mean, you won't find it in The Guardian, for example, or the Financial Times. But again, I think it's a big straw in the wind. I think that the EU, the European Court of Justice, the history is that it does not go out of line with the predominant opinions within the EU on these sort of questions. So again, it makes me think that more and more people in the corridors of power in Brussels and Frankfurt and Berlin and perhaps even Paris are tiring of this whole thing and are basically losing hope in it.
Yeah, at the same time, I was just reading today on the RT website is that two German, quote-unquote, academics have come out and claimed that Russia is preparing to use military power against European countries. Just today, okay? I mean, so all the trends we're talking about, beyond, the swamp intelligence intelligence community, the politically, the reality is completely different. Okay,
Yes.
These elites just gaslight themselves. So they see that this policy of pressure on Russia through sanctions, it's not working. It doesn't penetrate the consciousness of people. Of course, there are individuals out there, yes, of course, but overall, people are saying no, it's not the way things are. And we have these elites pushing these false narratives, and they're not gaslighting us; they're gaslighting themselves.
Okay, guys, let's get to some super chats. Remember, everybody on the live stream, to hit that like button and share the channel. When you hit the like button, it really helps the channel get out there. It helps the live stream get noticed by people who are surfing around YouTube. So hit that like. Alexander from Penguins fan, a super chat. Alex Mercuris, congrats England for winning the ICC Cricket World Cup, which you don't deserve to win.
Well, probably
you
not.
don't deserve. Is that okay?
I have to say,
I don't follow cricket, so I have no clue.
No,
I'm clueless.
No, I have to say, cricket is one of those things that baffles me completely. I mean, I've never got the hang of cricket at all. So please don't ask me any cricketing questions. I don't understand them. Many of my friends are incredibly keen on cricket, and you know, they go off to Lord's Cricket Grounds in London, which is very near to where I live, and they sit around and they drink champagne and eat strawberries and cream in the high summer, and that seems to be mainly what it's about. And no doubt some of them are wearing
I'd go just for that.
But that's the only reason. That's the only reason I would go. I've never understood cricket. Please don't ask me any cricketing questions.
Yeah,
I've watched a couple of cricket games. I have no idea.
They go on for days. Some of them. Some of them go on for days.
I like the tea. I like the tea thing, though. I think that's kind of cool.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's as a social event, it's extremely agreeable.
Okay, let's see. From Bernard Hutchinson, Foreign Minister Freeland is banned from Russia. Is that true that she's banned?
I don't know.
I would be surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if she's banned as an individual, but of course, if the Russians want to talk to Canada, they would presumably have to some extent to talk through her because she's the foreign minister. The people who don't want to talk between Canada and Russia is the present Canadian government. The Russians always talk to everybody. So,
do you remember that image? You remember that
No.
image when Victoria Nuland was at some kind of security conference, and the Russian they had the American delegation and the Russian delegation, and everybody was shaking hands. Every Russian official just avoided her hand. She was just standing there, and she was looking. She turned to the camera and was kind of bewildered. And I thought, "Don't you understand why no one wants to shake your hand?" Okay, it was really amazing. Okay.
Okay, super chat from Penguins fan Peter. Are Ukraine right wings harboring extreme Islamic terrorists? Are there Islamic terrorists in Ukraine?
I don't know, but I do know that there was a time that Poroshenko was thinking of entertaining, working with jihadists to undermine Crimea, right. because they're Turkey. In one mythology or another makes claims to Crimea in this kind of neo-Ottoman conception of the world. So there are certainly some people, but there were reports of that. I'm going to be very tepid and standoffish. I've come across that. I don't know if it's absolutely true.
I believe that it is, in the sense that the Crimean Tatar movement that is sponsored by Ukraine has a very strong Islamist aspect, and some of the people who are involved in it are definitely involved with jihadi movements. And I would add that if you're talking about the jihadist world, the world that has brought out Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all of these things, they consider some of these Crimean Tatars to be part of the, part of the sort of international brotherhood of jihadism, of which they are themselves a part of. So yes, there are jihadist groups in Ukraine, and the Poroshenko government certainly, had relations with them, no doubt at all.
Okay, super chat from Penguins fan says that Chrystia Friedland is banned, by the way.
Okay.
So
Oh,
we have
right.
confirmation
No loss.
from
No loss.
Penguins fan
No,
that she
no.
is banned.
No, she's working on Venezuela now, so she's busy.
Yeah, that's yeah. That was a big success.
Another screw up. Yeah,
Yeah.
another screw up.
Yeah, exactly. So, Alexander, I'm looking at the chat. Some people are talking or asking about Turkey, the S-400s,
Oh, yeah.
the sanctions that are going to be leveled against Turkey by the EU in relation to Cyprus. And of course, we have Erdogan recently coming out and saying that the S-400s are just the beginning. They want to get into a full military cooperation, producing weapons with Russia. Alexander, what's the backstory with Turkey, the S-400s, the EU sanctions that have not yet been detailed, but the EU has mentioned that
and the
sanctions are coming.
American sanctions
And
also.
very good, and yeah, exactly. And the Americans that are hitting the Turkish lira really, really hard. Many people, Alexander, like to compare Turkey to Russia and say, oh, well, the Russians, they withstood the sanctions and they came out better for it. But Turkey is a different situation, isn't it?
Very different.
It's a completely different situation. I mean, first of all, the political situation in Turkey is much more unstable. I mean, you cannot compare the political stature of Erdogan with Putin. I mean, Putin is almost, I mean, he has his critics, obviously, but I mean, he has very strong support in Russia. From the vast majority of the Russian population. Erdogan has passionate support from a section of the Turkish population and passionate opposition from many other people in Turkey. But the fundamental difference is in the economies. I mean, the Turkish economy is in deep recession. It's in very heavy debt. The lira is an extremely vulnerable currency. And of course, Turkey runs big deficits in its budget and in its overseas trade. This is the exact diametric opposite of Russia. Russia has zero inflation in June. Its inflation is falling rapidly. We've had economic figures for June on the industrial front, and they show industrial production rising fast. Its international reserves are at record levels. It runs a budget surplus. It runs a trade and balance of payments surplus. And of course, it's attracting increasing amounts of foreign investment from countries like Germany. The two countries could not be more different. And Russia is, of course, a huge, highly diversified, self-sufficient continental economy. It produces all the energy, all the food, all the raw materials that it needs. It's got a very advanced scientific and industrial and technological base. Turkey doesn't. I mean, it doesn't have those strengths. So we're not comparing there like with like. Now, this comes to the question of Erdogan. And I think Erdogan is in great danger of taking on too many people at once. He's angered the United States with the S-400 buy and with various attempts, basically insinuating that the United States was behind the coup attempt in 2016. It might have been. Certainly, I'm not convinced that it was.
I think it knew about it but didn't tell him, but the Iranians and the Russians did. Keep going.
Did exactly. He's now on very bad terms with the EU. This is, and by the way, the Cyprus thing is, in my opinion, almost the least of it. I mean, he's has a very bad relationship with the German and Austrian governments. He's quarreled with the Saudis over the Khashoggi affair. He's making lots and lots of enemies all around with a weak economy. And as I said, a political situation within Turkey itself.
And a mindless Syria policy. Let's not forget
and
that.
a mindless Syria policy, which is becoming full of contradictions because he backs the jihadis in Idlib. And at the same time, he says that he wants Syrian sovereignty restored in the Kurdish regions. I mean, it's very difficult to make him out sometimes. And yes, I think that the United States, this is my own personal view, is overreacting to this S-400 buy. I mean, other NATO countries have bought sophisticated weapons from Russia. Turkey's not the first. And I think from Erdogan's point of view, buying those weapon systems was not intended initially as a challenge to the US. It was more intended to seal a close relationship with Russia, which I think he rightly sees as being in Turkey's interests. I mean, they've now got this oil and gas relationship developing. Russia's a big investor in Turkey. Lots of Russian tourists go to Turkey.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But having said all of this, I think he's in danger of losing control of a foreign policy that is making too many enemies, at a time, as I said, when Turkey itself is not strong. And I'm going to guess, because I'm not party to the internal discussions that go on in the Kremlin and in the foreign ministry in Moscow, I think some people in Moscow are probably also concerned about this. They look at the situation
Absolutely.
in Turkey and they're saying to themselves, right, we've got this partnership with Erdogan, but can it last?
That is the best point here in all this, because they have a relationship with Erdogan, but they don't have necessarily a good relationship with Turkey. And this is what's concerning the Russians. I did a crosstalk yesterday. It's on air today. And we had a Turkish guest, and he thought things were going swimmingly because, I said, well, Turkey has the sovereign right to buy whatever weapons it's run. I mean, and on top of it, the Obama administration didn't allow Turkey to buy the Patriot weapon system, so they found an alternative, a cheaper one, maybe even better one. But then this Turkish guest thought he had it. He was skating along, and then he hit a brick wall with me, saying exactly what Alexander Makiris is saying, and said, "But your foreign policy is nothing short of a disaster." Okay. Oh, he was very upset about it. There was a time delay. It turned it into a train wreck. But he said that Turkey is helping to stabilize Syria. Of course, that's when I blew a fuse. I said, oh, you need to burn the village down to save it. Is that what you're saying? I said that repeatedly, which, of course, he didn't like. No, would Russia get into an arms manufacturing production deal with the Turks? Maybe, but not necessarily. This is not a strategic alliance, okay? There's, again, what Russia's doing. It looks for countries, particularly in that region, it can work with and find positive outcomes in the national interest, okay? There's no marriage here. And if Erdogan thinks that's happening, he's wrong. He's very wrong. The Russians have a lot of investment in construction. The Turks actually have a lot of investments in Russia, particularly in Moscow, in construction as well. It's something they both do well, okay? So there's a lot of commonalities, but the Kremlin is losing patience with Erdogan when it comes to Syria. I mean, come on, do your side of the deal. Get Idlib, finally collapse that center of jihadism. And Erdogan is caught. And then what we've talked before is growing evidence that he's siphoning off all that trouble that he's maintaining in Idlib to move it to Libya. Okay, another, I was going to say, S-storm hitting us, okay? And Erdogan, it's all your fault. It's all your fault. I mean, I challenged my Turkish guest. I said, but does Turkey support a sovereign Syria? Well, of course, I caught him with his pants down. He didn't know what to say. Just got argumentative. So Turkey's problems are mostly of its own making because it's a rich country. It's a smart country. They have a lot of resources. They have poor governance. And the country is very polarized. The hinterland is Erdogan country. But if you go to Ankara, Istanbul, the opposition is very open and it's very vocal, okay? And the country that has the most imprisoned journalists is Turkey.
Peter, a lot of people say that Turkey's going to be the first NATO domino to fall. Do you buy into that?
It's in the cards, yeah. But as I've said every time we've talked about this, that's a very good card that Erdogan has. And if he's going to put that on the table, he wants something for it. He wants something meaningful, tangible for it. So for Erdogan, everything is the bazaar. He's in the bazaar and he's haggling. That's his nature, and that makes him a survivor. You know, he's been around a while and he's been down a number of times and he's always come back. You know, he's like a weeble that wobbles but never falls down. And trading out a NATO membership, he's going to want something really sweet, because NATO needs Turkey far more than Turkey needs NATO.
Absolutely true. I should say, there's an article in the Daily Telegraph by Con Coughlin, who is a British intelligence and foreign office policy writer, who's known to have connections with the intelligence agencies here, who actually calls for Turkey to be expelled from NATO. Now, don't believe that. That simply isn't going to happen. NATO needs Turkey. It's a bluff. It's a bluff. It's an absolute bluff. But I think the fact that it's being said is an attempt to put pressure on people within Turkey. There are some people in Turkey who are very committed to keeping Turkey within NATO for all sorts of reasons, including, by the way, material ones. They benefit from it. So I think that is basically part of what that's all about. But I think that NATO will be extremely unhappy if Turkey leaves. I think Erdogan knows it, and I don't think he's got any actual intention to leave NATO. But if it ever comes to that, he'll do exactly what Peter says.
Yeah,
he'll haggle furiously.
I wouldn't necessarily say other NATO countries. I would say one particular NATO country, and that's the United States.
Exactly.
Okay?
He will haggle furiously to stay in. I mean, he will do it. Yeah.
And the thing is that, you know, he's looking at the region. So he's going to be looking at Russia. He's going to be looking on what kind of how could he cash in to go humiliate the Saudis. I mean, you know, he's going to want a real payday for this, okay? Because, I mean, as everyone knows, I want all of NATO to come apart, okay? And if it takes Turkey leaving it, that would be something I would be very interested in. But it's not going to come at a low cost. Like I said, Erdogan wants a big payday, and that means he's going to have to get some kind of regional security format together. And as Alexander Mercouris rightfully pointed out, I mean, Erdogan has not been the best neighbor in the neighborhood, and that's the dilemma that he faces right now.
So, Peter, what's his angle with Libya? Why is he getting involved in Libya?
My sense is he's trying to he's just trying to export the problem he has in northern Syria and say, you guys want out, but you can't come in Turkey. We'll send you over there. Okay, we'll get your guns, you take your stuff, and you keep the jihad going. Okay, Idlib and to the border is what keeps Erdogan up at night. Not what some angry congressperson or some stupid think tanker says in Washington. No, what's happening in northern Syria is a real security concern. I've always said, I've never agreed with and tried to legitimize the illegal invasion and occupation of Syria by Turkey. But there are the Kurds, and the Kurds have their own agenda, and Erdogan knows it, and it's not in Turkey's interest. But this is an opportunity that should be, he should back off on demonizing Assad and have the Damascus government have a format dealing with the Kurds. So we have to remember the Kurds and the Damascus government really didn't parlay during this entire conflict. They stayed away from each other, okay? Because they know it's going to end one day, and they're both going to be there. The Turks will be out, the Americans will be out, Al-Qaeda will be out, but who will be left? The Kurds and the Damascus government, okay? They're all waiting for that to happen. Turkey and the U.S. are spoilers. The sooner the Kurds and the Damascus government get down and talk about a situation that is finally stable, neither one of them is going to talk seriously while it's fluid. Why would they? Why would they? But once it is solidified, there is a sense of how to move forward. The Kurds and the Damascus government can talk. And my gut feeling is that Assad is going to say, let them have all but independence. Let them have their little parliament. Let them have the even natural resource extraction. I mean, just keep them in there. The Kurds will never have their own state, never. But they can get something a little bit less and live with it.
Alexander, super chat from Penguins fan. Erdogan bites more than he can chew.
Yep.
And Alexander, another super chat from Miss K on Libya. Already discussed Haftar and the cooperation with Israel to create for Israel a safe place in the Libyan desert, apparently with the aim to build a significant base for drones and probably beyond. Alexander, a lot of people are getting involved in Libya. It's becoming very confusing. Can you help simplify what's going on in Libya between Haftar, the government in Tripoli, Turkey, who's backing who? US, Russia, France, everyone seems to be getting involved, and it's a pretty dangerous situation what's happening right now in Libya.
It's an incredibly dangerous situation. I don't think we can simplify the internal struggle and the various outside parties that are becoming involved, because frankly, it's such a mosaic of people now that it's almost impossible to do that. It reminds me a little of the Lebanon conflicts of the 1980s and early 90s, when there were lots of people going involved with all kinds of different parties, and that unfortunately had a further very negative effect, which is that it prolonged the war in Lebanon. And I'm afraid this is going to prolong the war in Libya also. Now, my impression is that General Haftar has turned out to be weaker than many people, including myself, initially thought he was. He's not been able to take Tripoli. He's not been able to take the coastal town of Misurata. He seems to be bogged down at the moment. He's been getting lots of support from all sorts of different actors. There's a widespread belief that the US quietly backs him. That goes along with an equally widespread belief, by the way, that Russia backs him. We've now got Turkey involved. As the questioner said, the viewer said, we've also got Israel involved. And Italy is also apparently backing one side in the war, and France is backing a different side in the war. So we've got all these different players, all of them involved, none of them, I think, with any very coherent conception of where they want Libya to go.
It's like the Spanish Civil War.
Well, you know,
in a way.
There's a famous book about the Spanish Civil War in English, in Britain, called The Spanish Labyrinth. And we're looking at the Libyan labyrinth, it seems to me. Now, I think what has to happen is that, first of all, the outside parties need to accept that Libya is a sovereign state, and it needs to be largely left alone to settle its own affairs. And maybe there ought to be some kind of a international conference that brings all these groups together and makes a genuine effort to work towards establishing a kind of umbrella government. I think we're very far from that point yet, because I don't think any side yet feels itself sufficiently exhausted to give up. And all of the outside players still think that either they can win or there is a danger that their adversary might win. So the dynamic is to keep this conflict going on and on and on. Now, how it'll end, I don't know. Peter?
I don't either, but Haftar certainly is putting a lot of resources to making sure that he can export oil on the international market. That's his top priority right now. Now, the Russian angle of it is kind of mysterious to me. I don't have a lot of knowledge there, but my sense is what they do is they want to have somebody win and end this, because it ends up being just a magnet for all of these malign characters to show up. Okay, like I said, is Erdogan funneling some of the criminal and jihadist elements in Idlib? Is he getting rid of them and sending them to Libya? I mean, there are reports of that. There's chatter about that. I don't know if it's true, but it would seem to me that would make sense. So, Norman Davies wrote a wonderful book. It was called God's Playground, The History of Poland. Well, right now we have the Devil's Playground, a history of Libya.
Yes. Can I just say, I think the Libyan internal situation is almost impossible for an outsider to analyze.
Fair.
It's just too complicated. But what is absolutely possible to analyze, and what we must never forget, is the disaster that the 2011 Western intervention in Libya was. because Libya was a strong functioning state in 2011. It had a functioning government. It was economically, by African standards, very highly developed. It had a $250 billion investment program, which would have modernized the Libyan economy even further, and it had large international reserves. That has now been shattered, and no one knows how to put it together again. And the Libyan people are the victims. Those people, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, David Cameron, Nicolas Sarkozy, and the rest, who destroyed Libya, did one of the most terrible things that we have seen happen in recent history.
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely. And no one talks about it.
No one talks about it.
No one's held to account. No one says anything.
No.
Anything. And since you mentioned,
after Gaddafi helped Sarkozy with his re-election,
right,
or his election campaign in France, okay, then the favor was returned. Amazing.
Yes,
absolutely amazing. And since you mentioned Clinton, Alexander, let's shift gears, and I'll shift gears with a super chat from where is it? From Lord Brett Sinclair. Peter, as the Epstein saga spreads, who should be most worried?
Oh my God.
This is a big shift, but I'm segueing from Clinton, from Alexander's Clinton in Libya to Bill Clinton in the Epstein saga.
Well, I think it's something that you and I have talked about, and I'm very grateful that you came on Crosstalk because we did a specific episode on it. I think it's got like 50,000 hits, so I'm happy about that. I think you're the one that is really spot on. You know, follow the money. Where did he get his money? And I think what did you say? When we find out where we got his money, we'll know who the man is. And I think that remains the case here. Okay. I'm more interested in, you know, it's all nice and fun to, you know, try to convict someone by association or something like that. I want this kind of phenomenon where the elites feel they have impunity. I want a light to be shown on that. Okay, Epstein is a creep. Okay, and he's going to go to prison probably for the rest of his life. All right, I don't really have much doubt about that. But I would like to know how it all worked. Okay, I'm not out for vengeance. I'm out for justice. And I think we should keep our focus on that. There are plenty of people, and you saw it on Crosstalk, you know, but Bill Clinton knew him, but Donald Trump knew him. I'm not interested in that. I'm really not interested in that, okay? I want to understand how this worked, how it was protected, how big it was. Apparently, you couldn't run an operation like this without a lot of people knowing about it, okay? How did it happen that they got away with it for so long? I want to know that, okay? Because I rail against the elites that think they're so much better than we are, law-abiding citizens, when they run around and live their lives with impunity and hypocrisy. I want light shown on that. That's what I want to have happen.
Alexander, do you think we're going to find out?
Yeah,
from a legal standpoint, I mean, do you think we're going to get some transparency with this case?
It depends very, very much on how far this case is taken. I mean, I read an article by Andrew McCarthy, who is an American lawyer who writes for National Review, who I take a great deal of, you know, give a great deal of weight to. I think he's a very fine lawyer, and he was concerned that that Epstein would be able to take advantage of the double jeopardy rules and cite Acosta's the deal he did with Acosta to prevent prosecution. I can't believe that. I don't believe it either. I'm glad he brings up that possibility. But the charges of Epstein in New York are different. Different charges than from the jurisdiction in Florida. The Justice Department is very aware of that. They know that they don't want him to invoke double jeopardy. No, these are completely different charges. All right, and we have to remember, and I think the FBI and the Justice Department learned this a long time ago when it came to RICO, when going after the mafia. You know, trying, 20, 30, 40 people for hundreds of crimes, it takes forever to go through. They realized all you need to do is get one conviction on one count. Okay? And then you use that as leverage to say, you can go to jail for
45 years, you can die there, or you can go to jail for 10 years, but we need you to talk, okay?
Yes.
We want the evidence. So it's your choice. You want to be the only one that falls on your sword? You can take that decision. That's your decision, but you have to make the decision now. And there's no negotiating. Now, Epstein lived this luxurious life. He's gone from being on a luxury private airplane to a cell in New York City. Okay, it's up to him how it's going to all end. Okay.
Well, indeed. And actually taking the cue from what Peter has just said, and I think Peter's absolutely right. I mean, I think people like him do tend to talk, and we will probably find out. We're going to find out an awful lot. And I think this will be pursued. So I think we are going to find out an awful lot. But can I just come back to this other question that we had about, you know, who needs to be worried? Peter's absolutely right. Irrespective of the individual names, it's the whole thing. The whole thing was done in plain sight.
Yeah.
I mean, it was done in plain sight in New York. Lots of people visited his mansion. Lots of people got invited to his island. Lots of people used his plane. I mean, it is inconceivable that those people didn't know what was going on. Now, can I give an example from my own experience? I used to be a member many years ago of one of the very famous London clubs. And I attended a Christmas party, and I saw an awful lot of people turning up with very young girls. And I said to myself, this is not good. I don't want to be part of this. I immediately terminated my membership. Immediately. And these people still kept on going to Epstein. And they must have seen all of this. And I just find it very difficult to believe, that this wasn't generally known throughout the American social and political elite, and that, you know, word didn't eventually.
Well, Trump even said it. He said that he has a wonderful social life and he likes women on the younger side. Okay, you know, I mean, he said that. The thing is here is that you know, these, you know, the oldest profession, let's put it that way. Okay, I mean, that exists there, but you know, the people serving the hors d'oeuvres, okay, the chauffeurs, the caddies, okay, well, this didn't happen in a vacuum, okay, and I think that they have to talk to those people, not necessarily saying we're going to put you in prison forever, but you know, you are an accomplice to this, okay, you did witness these things. And,
absolutely.
And I think is in a practical way, if you're going after the primary target, what you do is you take out all the allies in his orbit first, okay? And then you compare, then you have the ability to compare stories, okay? You know, you want everybody to sing, but you don't want people to compose, okay? I mean, I feel very confident because I think the FBI wants to have a win on this after they've had their reputation so smeared by the upper echelon. I think it's the 7th floor at Main Justice. You know, they need a win on this here. And it's been talked about. I mean, you know, if we could just have go in a time machine one day before his arrest and type in young girls, Lolita Island, Epstein. I mean, there's tons of it out there. Endless amounts of stuff to read. Okay, I don't think Main Justice would be doing this if they didn't think they had a very strong case. But I think the case they need to present, how systematic it was, how pervasive it was, and what we should learn as a society. Because these two forms of justice, one for us, and I mean, there are people that go to, how many hundreds of thousands of people are in prison for possession of marijuana? I mean, that's ridiculous, okay? And then you have this guy preying on young girls, and so many people knew about it. Well, there's something wrong with society.
And continued to come to his house and his parties and accept his invitation.
What does that tell you,
about it?
Alexander? What does that tell you, though?
They believe they have impunity.
Yes, exactly. It tells you that they're not scared because these elite, these globalists, these people in power have that feeling that they're above the law. And the main question, I see a lot of people in the chat saying it, and I forgot the name of the person in the chat, I passed by, but the question is, why now? Why now? And that's the question I believe, Peter, that you posed during the crosstalk as well. Everyone's asking that question. So if you guys had to guess, we're guessing, we don't know, what would it be to both of you? Why now? After so many years of knowing, everyone knew. We reported on this in 2016, 2017. Why now, though?
I think it's an attempt to try to get Trump. I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Okay? And all the attempts, Russiagate, collusion, obstruction, racism, they all fail. Now they're going on what? A, B, C, D, plan F.
Alexander, what are your thoughts? Why now?
I have to say, I agree. I think that the key to this was the Acosta deal. Acosta was in Trump's cabinet.
The weakest link. Yeah,
exactly. The weakest link in the cabinet. Trump himself has some kind of well, there've been allegations about his affairs. So I think there was an assumption, a gamble, that going after Epstein would ultimately lead to Trump. I predict he won't. By the way,
do too.
I mean, as we said, I think on a video we did, Alex. I mean, the one thing I know about Trump is that apparently he threw Epstein out of his club, which is more than anyone else seems to have done. And he also, at the time of the original investigation 10 years ago, seems to have been the only one of Epstein's friends who actually apparently was prepared to cooperate fully with the police and was prepared to give a lot of information. So I don't think it is actually going to touch Trump, but I think that was what triggered it.
It won't touch Trump. It's CPAC as well, Peter. Remember, we mentioned that during the crosstalk. He was one of the only people to, I mean, he mentioned it to a CPAC audience of thousands. What was going on? He hinted at it at least.
Also, I think, again, like I'll just repeat myself here, but I really think that Maine Justice wants a win here. They need a win. I don't think they're necessarily going after Trump. No, I mean, that's the political spin. Okay. Yes. But I think that they see that this is an egregious thing. They've got more evidence. More people have come forward. They know this is like virtually a slam dunk because Comey and Strzok and Page and all these people have really defamed the FBI. For non-Americans watching this here, I mean, the praise and it's almost like a deity, the FBI in the United States. I mean, they really feel that they're above. They're the most professional, the most dignified law enforcement agency. They take a lot of pride in that. Becoming an FBI agent isn't easy either, okay? No. And I think that, the last 2-3 years have really hurt the FBI. And this is, I mean, going after a pedophile, I mean, that's got to bring some kind of consensus, irrespective of how you feel that this is simply wrong and something has to be done about it, okay? So I think you can't dismiss the thing. It's an institutional thing. I don't see any inkling whatsoever that the FBI is going to hunt Trump for this. Okay, I don't see that at all. I see people in the media, and Twitter, they want to spin this story this way because, I mean, the Epstein was known to be a Democratic donor, okay, for the Democrats. I don't know. Maybe he donated to Republicans. I don't know, but he is at least known as being a donor to Democrats. So the first thing the Democrats are going to do in the media is going to try to flip the story and make it a distraction. That I don't know if you've seen the pictures on Facebook that people. I don't know if they're fake pictures with Trump and young women and all that. I don't know if they're photo. It's been contrived. I don't know, but it's certainly. The story goes down how you feel. This is a elite pedophile ring, and it's whose fault? It must be Trump's or Clinton's. Okay, that's how simplistic our media has become.
Well, Chuck Schumer weighed in, and then he became awfully quiet when it was reported that he received, I believe, $10,000 from Epstein in campaign donations.
Harvard got millions.
Yeah. So, I mean, Epstein was donating to the Democrats. Alexander, the one thing that I get out of this, and the one reason I think that they cannot get Trump, and they won't get Trump, is actually a comment that Prince Hector of Troy made, and that is, where's the Hollywood outrage? And I agree with that.
Yeah.
During the Weinstein case, it was a controlled burn, and they knew exactly what they were doing when they gave up Weinstein, all of Hollywood, when they ratted on Weinstein, the terrible things that Weinstein was doing, because they had it all set up. They had the hashtags, they had all the Hollywood actors and actresses coming out and, tweeting and making the commercials and voicing their outrage. During Epstein, the only thing that you heard from the mainstream media was Acosta. And you don't hear Hollywood at all. No one's voicing outrage. No one is saying anything. So to me, Alexander, that means that they don't really have enough to get Trump on this. And they're just kind of, just staying quiet. Just be quiet.
Yeah,
we don't have the goods on him here.
But I think, the ones that be speaking out the loudest are the ones that are most worried. And that's why they're being quiet.
Exactly.
The other thing that's very remarkable, by the way, I agree with all that you said, but it's very remarkable how this Epstein story is being completely ignored here in Britain. There's barely any reporting of it at all. And compare that again with the enormous reporting that there was of the Harvey Weinstein case, the enormous reporting there was, by the way, of the Kavanaugh case, where there was absolutely nothing, by the way. I mean, that was just one allegation, a contrived allegation. But this case, where to be absolutely clear about this is much more serious.
Andrew's the brother of Prince Charles. Andrew is the brother of Prince Charles,
the second son of the Queen. No question about Prince. I mean, very senior member of the royal family.
But again, I want to keep us all honest here. I am not going to go down the path of guilt by association.
No.
Okay, let's be careful.
Absolutely.
No, we're not going down there. I'm just trying to understand what the relation is of Andrew to the royal family.
Yes.
But I think there's going to be a lot of more stories told about this.
Yes.
I think this is not going to be a controlled burn. I think we're going to be surprised. We're going to be shocked. When the arrest was announced, they had that placard out. It had Epstein's picture and a big phone number. Yes. And I have to believe that people are taking advantage of that. The horse is out of the barn, so people now are going to feel safer to come out. Okay, and we have to just look at the time frame of this. I mean, if we're looking at young women that were abused 15 years ago, well, they're 15 years older right now. Okay, and maybe have more strength to come out and say. I mean, I read one account. Oh, it was horrifying to read how this 13, 14-year-old girl, what she went through. And I have to believe her. I mean, the detail that she put into it, it seemed very realistic to me. And I can understand why someone would be shocked into silence. Okay, shocked into silence. And so, again, I have to believe Main Justice wouldn't have started this whole thing unless they felt very, very strongly that they had a case to be made, okay? And I think that's why they want the public to get involved in it, to strengthen their case, okay? Because they really want to get to maybe the bottom of this here. And Epstein is an enigma. I mean, we've talked about how we don't know how he made his money, okay? Did he use it, extortion? Say, I've got pictures and film of you, you have to invest into my fund, okay? And then he puts it in the S&P and gets a reasonable return. The thing is that not that he was a great financier, is that somehow he was able to attract a huge amount of capital where he didn't really have to manage it. It just kind of managed itself because he wasn't looking for high returns. He was just looking for a modicum of returns, which could be basically guaranteed, 2-3%. But if you're looking at a huge amount of dollars, then that 2 or 3% is still a lot of money. And, and that seems like the most plausible thing, is that you have to invest in me.
Yes.
Okay, we're a little over an hour. Let's get to some more super chats and change gears a little bit. Let's see. We have from Valley as a super chat. Thank you, Valley, for that $20 super chat. We have from Gary, super chat, £10. Alexander, buy yourself some green tea and send some to Peter.
Oh yes. I don't know whether Peter likes green tea actually, but
Not really.
I've
Not really.
I've got heaps actually. I don't need to buy any. So, but it's not green tea that I'm drinking. I'm actually drinking coffee at the moment. So there we are.
Right. Okay. From Lord Brett Sinclair, Peter, if Iran is attacked, what can they do to hit back? How well armed are they?
Well, the United Arab Emirates will disappear, for starters. For starters. Iran has missiles that can target the most important oil export facilities of Saudi Arabia, so that will be severely damaged. No ship will be able to pass through the Straits of Hormuz. You're looking at a global recession. You could even use a depression. These people, these politicos, the Boltons of Pompeos, they live in this imaginary world, but the Pentagon doesn't. They know the impact, and Iran would never attack the United States directly. Probably wouldn't. I mean, not even in the region, except for maybe some troops in Iraq. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to target soldiers. You can arms depot. Boom, it's gone. Okay, I mean the amount of asymmetrical things that Iran can do in the region it's almost infinite what they can do, and the U.S. will have a terrible time in reacting to it. And no, and do you think Iraq? Do you think Iraq wants to get pulled into this thing? They're adamant they don't want to get pulled into another war. Yeah. And all the big words coming out of the Saudis and the Emirates, they're the ones that are going to pay dearly for it. And you know what? Israel won't be left untouched either.
Alexander from Gobarwala, what's going on with the tanker that the UK seized? The Iranian tanker. I mean, we don't hear about it. I mean, is it under control by the UK or?
It's actually, we do hear about it here in Britain. It's still a big story. I mean, the British don't. I think a lot of people in Britain feel that seizing that tanker was a mistake and has involved Britain in all kinds of problems. The story is it's still in Gibraltar. It's still being held in Gibraltar. The British are desperately trying to find a way to get it released. Jeremy Hunt, our incompetent foreign secretary, completely incompetent foreign secretary, who's running against Boris Johnson for the Conservative leadership and is going to lose badly, tried to get the Iranians to promise that the oil would not be delivered to Syria as grounds as a reason for releasing the tanker.
Pretty please.
Well, no, quite. I mean, the Iranians gave him a very dusty answer to this because, by the way, can I just nail one particular story that you're hearing all over the place, which is that this tanker was supposedly seized in respect of EU sanctions that allegedly prohibit the export of oil to Syria. There are no EU sanctions in existence prohibiting the export of oil to Syria. And if such sanctions did exist, they would not authorize the British to seize a tanker from a third country, Iran, which is not a member of the European Union, going to Syria, which is also not a member of the European Union. The European Union does not claim universal jurisdiction for its laws, as the United States does. And in any event, and I come back to this, there are no such sanctions in existence. That story the British have invented is an invention. That there is clearly some kind of a blockade of Syria and an attempt to stop oil going to Syria, but it's not based on any sanctions framework. Anyway, the British are in a difficult situation. They've sent a third warship to the Gulf. It seems the British ships are now having great problems navigating the Gulf. And as I understand it, there are fewer and fewer of them now tanking up with oil there. And I think the British have bitten off more than they can chew. And can I just add to that very comprehensive discussion of Iranian military capabilities that Peter gave? that the Iranians also have a very, very highly developed submarine force. They're small midget submarines specifically designed to operate in the Gulf. Incredibly difficult to track, even by the most advanced.
They learned the lesson from
warships.
the tanker. Remember the tanker wars? Remember
Exactly.
that? They learned
Exactly.
the lesson that they needed submarines. Yep.
Exactly. So, I mean, that poses an enormous threat to merchant shipping in the Gulf, which I say the Americans and the British don't really have an answer to.
And we have to also point out that once that starts, the insurance costs for transport will just go through the ceiling. They won't do it. They won't do it because it won't be profitable.
No.
I mean, this is so much bluster, so much bluster.
Yes.
Okay. It's really see what.
Why go down that road, Peter?
No,
Why did
it's
they go down that
intimidation.
road?
It's intimidation. It's bluffing, intimidation, and
Yes.
and what it does is it has just the reverse effect. Okay, because these sanctions do not hurt the elites; it hurts the people. But the people will embrace the elites because they're patriotic. They love their country. Okay, and when Giuliani is with the MEK, a cult, claiming them the legitimate government of Iran, all Iranian television has to do is take Giuliani in Albania, where the MEK are, who, for God's sake, I don't know why they're in Albania, and just videotape his address, and then you translate it into Farsi, and you show the Iranian people. Uprising? What uprising? It's ridiculous. These people are so sloppy and stupid.
Alexander from Saya, who is Iran selling oil to now? Who is paying them hard currency? Is the black market trade enough to sustain them?
Well, Iran has actually quite a big economy. It's quite a big country, and it's quite a sophisticated country, and it's got its own industrial base, which is larger than that of most Arab states or Middle East states, and it's also got quite a, by the standards of the region, quite an advanced technological base. The sort of people who are probably buying Iranian oil quietly are well, first of all, Pakistan, definitely Turkey, and it seems quietly China still.
Right.
So they are.
And who knows? India might be finding ways through secondary third parties doing the same thing.
Exactly. I think the important thing to say is this: with these kind of sanctions and sanctions blockades, there is usually a period of about a year when they're enforced very rigorously, and people are very nervous to go round them, and then eventually people find ways, and over time these sanctions regimes and embargoes and blockades start to be undermined and become increasingly less effective. So I think you will find, especially if the oil price remains high, which it sort of is at the moment, that there will be increasing demands for Iranian oil, and Iran will be able to find customers for its oil. But it's a misconception that Iran is a one-trick pony. Saudi Arabia is. If the Saudi Arabia had its oil embargoed and blockaded, that would cause a massive existential crisis in Saudi Arabia. Iran will take a severe economic hit. Talk is of a -6 contraction in Iran's economy this year, but they will survive
because they've learned to live with sanctions.
Exactly.
I mean, there's been a lot of import substitution going on in many sectors of the economy. Okay.
Yes.
I mean, but it shows you the level of malign activity when there was that massive flooding in northern Iran and the U.S. enforced the blockade of any kind of aid. I mean, it's just shameless, absolutely shameless activity. It just boggles the mind. People do you know how much that would help the opposition? Because they could have said, look, the government can't do it, but foreigners can. What kind of coup that would have been? But no, these people with cork brains.
Yes.
Bolton and Pompeo. They just can't think. They're stupid people.
Yes. I mean, and just to finish on Iran, as I said, at the end, or behind it all, there's also the Russians, always the Russians, who before 2015 had negotiated a big oil for goods swap with Iran at a time when Iran was already under sanctions. And I suspect that will be revived also.
Yeah.
Okay, some more super chats from Mary, $5 super chat. Great show. Thank you, Mary. From Paul, Peter, where is the footage from the 3 or 4 oil tankers on board? CCTV that exists as an anti-piracy countermeasure. That's a good point. I'm sure there is CCTV footage, is there not?
I'm sure there is. Okay. And it's a very good question, but I'm afraid it's probably rhetorical. Yes. Yes. Where is it? Yeah.
Where is it?
Yeah, that would clear things up pretty quickly, wouldn't it? Alexander, super chat from Penguins fan. U.S. sanctioning China for violating Iran oil. Will it work? What will happen?
Well, I think the United States is going around sanctioning everybody, imposing tariffs on everybody. It's a tool that has never worked very well, is now being grossly overused by the United States and cannot possibly succeed against China, which at nominal GDP rates based on, nominal GDP based on exchange rates, has the world's second biggest economy, and on purchasing power parity has the world's biggest economy. Of course it won't work. The only thing it will do will be infuriate China. Chinese are very angry about it.
And make any kind of progress on trade relations even worse.
Exactly. I mean, it's difficult for people who haven't traveled to China to get a sense of the sheer scale of the Chinese internal economy now. It is simply enormous. The idea that sanctions can dent it is just silly, frankly.
Alexander, super chat from Penguins fan, an update on Idlib, Syria. We touched pretty well on this before, but
well, we have. But I mean, I think it's useful that that Penguins fan has brought it up. He always does, by the way, and he's right to. Now, what's happened is that I think at the moment things are a bit on hold in Idlib. There's not been the anticipated Syrian offensive in Idlib. And I think there are reasons for that, which are external reasons. Firstly, I think the Russians and the Turks have been waiting to see this S-400 sale go through. But Peter's absolutely right. The Kremlin is losing patience with Erdogan over his foot dragging on Idlib. And now that the S-400s have been delivered, I think Erdogan will be receiving increasingly tough messages from the Russians about Idlib, which I think he will have to heed because he's so out of friends in every other respect.
Having really annoyed the Americans with this S-400s. I mean, Erdogan is going to have to give something to the Russians, okay? Because the Russians, only thing the Russians want when it comes to Syria is that Erdogan keep his word. That's all they want. They don't want any favors. They don't want any pretty pleas. You signed up to this. Do it, finally.
Do it. Yeah. And can I just say, I mean, Peter talked about how he had been vindicated on Ukraine. He's also been vindicated, as we have been on the Duran, on something else, which is this meeting that happened a few weeks ago in Israel between the national security chiefs of Russia, Russia, Israel, and the US.
Yeah, because Russia was supposed to throw Iran under the bus, remember?
Iran under the bus, and Syria to a great extent under the bus also. And I think that, again, there were probably discussions about Idlib there, and I think things were partly put on hold to get that negotiation out of the way. But as we said, the Russians didn't give an inch. And it seems both the Israelis and the Americans came away from that meeting, frankly, rather stunned, because they'd been expecting some sort of shift in the Russian position, and it didn't happen. But I think what's now happening is that we've got that summit out of the way. We've got the S-400 delivery out of the way. There is going to be soon a major tripartite summit between Russia, Turkey and Iran to discuss Syria. I think Idlib will be at the absolute center of all of this. I think the Russians, backed by the Iranians, will tell Erdogan, time to fulfill your promises now. And I don't think he's in any position to resist.
Okay, Peter, let's go back to Epstein with a super chat from David Bauer. Sheldon Adelson, Macau, Las Vegas, Israel. Too many Maxwell boxes to check. Peter, me and Alexander did a video specifically focusing on Maxwell, Robert Maxwell, and Ghislaine Maxwell. What do you make of the Maxwell connection to Epstein? He's a pretty powerful guy. He had a very mysterious death. His daughter gets tangled up with Epstein. What do you make of that?
I want to be very cautious. I really don't want to say anything on that because I don't want any kind of defamation. I think it's a very important question to ask. I mean, particularly when you have these rich and powerful people, and in this case with media, we just need some more transparency. How his daughter ended up being, quote unquote, madam, as some people calling her, that is really strange. It's very, very strange.
I mean, it's everyone trying to understand the infrastructure, the history behind the man and the people around him. I mean, everyone is now starting to dig into not only Epstein's past, but the people who were associated with him.
I mean, the thing is that we may find out that this was just one huge extortion scheme, and one individual with a sick predilection for young girls, and he was able to attract other people with the same interest. The real story may be a massive, massive extortion racket. That's what it's probably all about, in a way. I mean, of course, we should focus on this absolutely disgusting behavior, but it's good. That's just used as a prop, unfortunately, for something on a much grander scale. And I think that's what we're going to find out. These young women were bait. That's what they were. They were treated as bait and used and abused. All right. So, because Alexander Christopher, you're the one that brought it up, and you're the one that I think is you asked the most fundamental question: how did he make his money? And I think we'll understand this story.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a lot of people are asking that question. A lot of people are digging. So I think we'll find out.
Yeah, well, having a outdated Saudi passport. Oh, wow, throw that into the mix. Throw that into the mix. Yes,
indeed. And photographs of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. I mean, that all seems extraordinary to me, too.
What do you think that points to, Alexander, that someone would have a Saudi passport? What does that tell you? Does that tell you anything?
I don't think much extradition there.
It is extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult to get the citizenship of Arab Gulf states. I mean, those countries give out their citizenships very, very reluctantly. So for Epstein to have been able to get a Saudi passport, and apparently it's a genuine Saudi passport.
Under a different name.
Under a different name. There must have been an important quid pro quo. As I said, the mind reels, and one wonders what it was. But as Peter says, there are so many unanswered questions. This case begs for transparency, a proper investigation, a proper trial.
And I have to believe that the FBI and Main Justice have been able to identify individuals that can start connecting dots.
Yes.
I don't think they would have made this move unless they had some the members in his orbit that they've talked to. Because if you read the indictment, it's somebody talked. Somebody did.
Yes. I mean, the other thing that's very interesting, by the way, is that apparently lots of diamonds were found in his safe. Now, the point about diamonds is that they are the kind of things that people stock up, who expect to have to be on the run very fast, because they are light and they are easy to carry in quantities that are, can be converted into money very quickly. So it suggests that he was always considering the possibility that he might have to make a quick exit.
And he had that very large mural of him as a prisoner surrounded by guards. He commissioned it, and it was in his home. I don't know if it was in Florida or New York, but that's weird. I mean, that confirms that Alexander McCurry just said. I mean, this guy was preparing to be on the run at a drop of a hat, it looks like. It appears.
Yes.
At least seemingly, it seems to be logical to me, okay? Again,
Yes.
I really want to stay away from the speculation, okay? But
Yes.
just for the very reason we have so few facts.
Yes.
Yeah, we have to speculate because, we don't have the facts. But yes, I'm seeing the chat. Amazing Polly is doing some great work on the Epstein case. But, I will say this about what you said, Alexander, quid pro quo with Saudi Arabia. And I'm sure you know this too, Alexander, when you travel around Greece, especially in the summer, Greece or Cyprus, and you see these very wealthy Saudi guys roaming around with their entourage and their harems of women.
Well, indeed.
Very young women. And it doesn't take much to say that there might have been a quid pro quo between these very powerful, wealthy Saudis and Epstein.
Well, yeah,
Absolutely.
well, I think we can say with absolute assurance that, he had to have done something. The Saudis had to have a very, very, very good reason to do that. Okay.
Yes.
Why? Why would they do it with this individual with seemingly no official past? That's very interesting.
Yes.
Super chat from Lord Brett Sinclair. The Epstein case is very useful for Netanyahu as Barak is implicated in it. Suspicious.
A lot of people are implicated in this, okay? The thing is that I want to stress again, we have to be careful of not guilt by association. I really want to be careful with this because I don't want to draw such use a broad brush here, okay?
Yes.
I mean, maybe some people went to the island and they never met Epstein. They went on their own plane. There could be a lot of things going on here that we don't know about. Okay, what was the famous scientist, the guy that was paralyzed, Stephen Hawking?
Stephen Hawking. Yeah.
He went there also. Okay,
Yeah.
But I think it's fair to say, I'm trying to be charitable here. I don't think he would have been involved in any kind of extracurricular activity, if you know what I mean. He was there too. So I'm sorry. I really just want to be cautious because I don't want to be like everybody else.
Yes, and can I just add to what Peter's saying? We should be especially careful of photographs in which Epstein and some important person appear together. It's very easy to take photographs, and photographs in themselves can tell you very little. Epstein would have known lots of people.
And this is one thing that I am aware of. I give lots of master classes. I'm invited to conferences. I'm invited to give talks, and I'm very aware of who's taking a picture with me with someone else. I always fold my arms as well if it's with a woman. Okay, so pictures can be very, very innocent, or they can be used as used as a weapon. And that's the kind of age we live in right now. Okay,
I'm afraid so.
Just because there's so many people that can just walk right up to you and someone can snap it. That can happen. Okay, so we have to be careful of these things. Okay, but I want to go back and find justice for all these victims here. That's what we should do as a society. That's what our goals should be. And then, and once we get justice, then we met out punishment.
Yes.
Agreed. Alexander.
Okay, Alexander Christopher, I've got about 9% on my iPhone.
Okay, we're moving along. We've still got a couple of pretty hot topics that we need to cover, but we're going to probably go to Alexander a little bit more because Alexander is UK related. So let's start with the first super chat, which is a topic that I want to get to, and we did a video. Actually, I put it up today. But the question is from Lord Brett Sinclair. Alexander, do you believe the UK has already left the EU? Has the Robin Tilbrook case got legs? So I encourage everyone to see the video that we did on Robin Tilbrook. Alexander, do you want to comment on that case here in the live stream?
I think, the answer is the Robin Tilbrook case should, in my opinion, have legs. I use the word should because, of course, the High Court judge who looked at it said that it was wholly without merit. Now that decision is being appealed. I think that the appeal should succeed because I think the judge was wrong.
Now, Alexander, can I interrupt you 1 second just to tell all our viewers that you did a lot of legwork, you did a lot of research, you looked at the case for well over a couple of weeks, and we wanted to make sure we got it right with this video.
Absolutely. Yes, and by the way, I've also spoken to some of the people who are involved. So, as I said, I'm confident about what I'm saying. It is a well-structured, well-argued case brought seriously by people who've obtained very high-quality legal advice. What it basically says is that that the British Parliament passed a law which said that on the 29th of March 2019, Britain leaves the European Union. The law has not been repealed, it's not been set aside, and in light of that, the argument that is made is that Britain has, in accordance with that law, left the European Union. What the government is saying is that yes, that law does exist. Yes, that law was not followed at all, but the government, the British government, still has a residual prerogative power that in some way overrides the Brexit date of 29th March 2019, which is in that statute. Now, for me to say definitely this case will succeed is beyond my pay grade. I just don't have the knowledge of constitutional law and of the role of the prerogative, the government's prerogative powers, to be able to say that with confidence. But that there is an arguable case of that, I personally have no doubt, and I think it should be heard. So for that reason, I disagree with the judge that the case is wholly without merit. In fact, I strongly disagree with that view, and I definitely think that that case should be heard and that the appeal that is being brought against the judge's decision should succeed.
Okay, Alexander, and another topic that I wanted to get to, and Bernard Hutchinson beat me to it, and it has to do with Tommy Robinson. Super chat is Tommy Robinson verdict, fair or unfair? Alexander, I want you to take it a little bit further. It's terrible that we've got to this point.
Okay, gentlemen, maybe this would be a good time for me to exit here because these are British topics here. I'm not going to be able to add much value, and I got like 3% on my phone. I apologize to everyone. I was out in the town, and I had a lot of messages. I wasn't able to recharge my phone to its full extent before this, so I apologize to everyone, and I'll see you all very, very soon.
Very quickly, Peter, what are you covering on Crosstalk, and what are you looking at?
Antifa, is it a domestic terrorist organization? Of course, the answer is yes. I want to argue with people that tell me it's not. That'll be our recording tomorrow. It'll be on air all day, Friday, midday Moscow time. It'll be on YouTube. I'm hoping we get some good guests. My producers are still working on it, and we're going to tackle that because I'm had enough of their nonsense and destroying the body politic. Okay, I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk about the squad as well. Okay, the squad.
AOC +3.
Yeah, that's right. So. Thank you, guys, and thank you for everyone watching. Okay?
Thank you, Peter, very much. Have a great day. Thank you. All right, Alexander.
Yeah, Tommy.
Let's roll.
Tommy Robinson.
Tommy Robinson. It's terrible that it got to this point, is it not? I mean,
well, yes. I mean, I have to say I've read the judgment, and it's a high-powered judgment. It's carefully argued, and I'm going to say very, very, very good judges involved, very careful legal reasoning, and I have to say this. I think the judgment is correct. I think he is guilty of contempt of court, as that offence is defined. I think he went too far, and I think he's lost the plot a little. Well, in fact, more than a little, in the way that he goes about reporting cases and, in fact, disregarding court orders. What I also think about Tommy Robinson is that he has been goaded to an extraordinary degree by the British establishment, and I am sure that this has played a big role in encouraging him to overstep the limit in the way that he has done. So the answer is that, yes, I'm afraid I think it is the correct judgment, but as you rightly say, Alex, there is a background to this story which mustn't be overlooked.
What do you think is that background, Alexander? I mean,
Well,
why is the establishment so fixated on trying to bring him down? What do you, I mean, he does have a strong following. Is that not correct? I mean, I haven't been to UK years, but he's a dynamic speaker. He knows how to bring a crowd. That's for sure. At least that's what I've seen.
He does know how to bring a crowd, and he does have a following. I don't think we should overestimate his importance in British politics. And I've said this before, and I know this is an unpopular view, but I think he looks like a bigger political force to people outside the UK than he does to people within the UK. Why does he upset and annoy people so much here? I have to say, I think it's because of the way in which he has identified a specific problem, which is all these grooming gangs which operated
the problem, because we always lose track as to how we got here.
Exactly. And I mean, this comes back to this impunity question that we've been discussing with Epstein. This is a completely different form of impunity. But all over England, you've had these grooming gangs, which are gangs, let's say it straightforwardly, most of them from the Indian subcontinent, overwhelmingly, well, I mean, exclusively, as far as I can see, Muslim men, who have been grooming young girls, most of them, well, many of them underage, and have been using them to have sex. And they've been doing it in various hotels and so-called hotels or hostelries up and down England. And this has happened in many places, far too many places. And it happened in particular, I mean, one particularly notorious case was in Oxford, which is, of course, the city of the great University of Oxford. And again, a lot of this was going on in plain sight. And I think what happened was that the British authorities, very concerned not to disrupt, as they saw it, good community relations. This is always the concern that they have, and not to want to appear racist, despite getting complaints often from social workers about what was happening, didn't investigate this thing properly and let it slide for far too long. Now, Tommy Robinson has made a big issue out of this, and it is, in truth, a huge scandal, because again, we're looking at lots of young people who were grotesquely abused. And I think that by highlighting the errors is not the right word, the cover-up, if you like, within the system that allowed this to go on for so long, I think he has alarmed and upset a British establishment, which, to be frank, is far more concerned, to my mind, about appearing to be anti-racist than it is about protecting young, white English girls.
So that's the crux of
what's
happening. Yeah.
That's the crux of it. But I have to say also, and I come back to what I was saying, he's been goaded into going too far. I mean, he went. There is a balance, and people who follow me know that I'm someone who concerns himself very much about due process. I mean, the thing that's worried me about Russiagate is the due process, for example, was thrown out of the window in Russiagate. There is due process. You have to balance the right of free expression, which is a qualified right, with the right of a fair trial, which is an absolute right. And these people who've done these terrible things, repulsive though they may be, have a right to a fair trial. And that right sometimes includes certain reporting restrictions. Now, Tommy Robinson said those reporting restrictions were wrong, but the fact that he thinks they are wrong doesn't give him the right in law to break them. And I think that you have to observe the law. This has always been my view, especially when it's there in order to protect someone's rights in a fair trial. So that's why I think this decision was a correct decision. But I come back to my original point, which is that this issue of the grooming gangs is a huge scandal, and it's had nowhere near the kind of attention in Britain that it deserves to have. And the fact that Tommy Robinson has been left to articulate the concern that many people feel about it is a major reason why he has the support within British society that he does.
Alexander, I think that was an excellent analysis. Excellent analysis of a very complicated situation.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. Let's go to some more super chats from Penguins fan. Recent Russian submarine incident that killed 14 sailors. Does the U.S. have anything to do with it, given Pence canceled his trip to New Hampshire? What do you make of Pence's cancellation? Right. It was interesting, to say the least.
It was very interesting. I don't know is the answer. All I will say is that both the Russians and the Americans are saying incredibly little about this incident. And there's no explanation of why Pence dashed back to Washington in the way that he did. It seemed maybe it was a coincidence that it happened on the same occasion as this incident, but we simply don't know. And it does look rather like a bit too much of a coincidence, but it might have been. What I will say is this: during the Cold War, there were lots of incidents between submarines of the two sides, far more than we knew about then. There were collisions, there were accidents, there were aggressive steps taken. I also understand, by the way, that there were raids on each other's ports, or at least on Russian ports, and that the Russians developed very, very advanced anti-frogmen techniques, including developing their own frogmen to counter sabotage operations. So this kind of thing does go on between the great powers, between America and Russia, or has happened in the past. And maybe it's not implausible at all that this incident with this submarine, the Losharik, by the way, as it's referred to in Russia, this particular submarine, maybe we are looking at something like that again.
Okay. From Jason Smith, Alexander, $50 super chat. Thank you, Jason. Just wanted to support the channel and also say I'm expecting my black polo with gold eagle and 15-ounce gold eagle logo mug. Thank you, Jason, very much. This is the mug.
Would it be this mug?
Yes.
Exactly. We both got it.
Okay, and let's see. And the question is, Alexander, also thoughts on the China-Africa relationship and how it will affect China-U.S. relations, if at all. Great question. That doesn't get talked about much at all.
It doesn't get talked about, which perhaps it should, because, of course, the United States, since the end of the Cold War, has seen Africa essentially as its own, territory. I mean, geopolitically. I mean, the US has been very established in Africa. And, of course, Barack Obama, for obvious reasons, took a great interest in Africa and developed very close connections with some African leaders. And now we see the Chinese moving into Africa with deep pockets, establishing all sorts of economic and trading connections with African states, building infrastructure there in a big way. And the United States is perhaps unsurprisingly extremely unhappy about it. Now, my own personal view is that this is good for Africa. I think China is a country that needs raw materials. Africa has an abundance of raw materials. China is a country that can provide infrastructure. It is superb at providing infrastructure. Africa needs infrastructure. China is a country with a long history of providing high educational facilities for African students. Again, that gives African students an opportunity to go somewhere other than the United States and Britain, which is becoming very expensive for them to do. So I think unequivocally It is a good thing for Africa. That doesn't mean that the Chinese aren't there in their own interests. And it doesn't mean that the Chinese won't, from time to time, drive very hard bargains. I don't think it means that Africa is becoming dependent on China. And I think we should be very skeptical, or even indeed cynical, about some of this publicity we see pouring out of Britain and the United States, especially, about how predatory China is supposed to be, because frankly, that looks to me a little bit like propaganda against a very, very powerful commercial rival on territory, as I said, which the Americans and the British up to now have largely seen as their own.
All right, great question. Alexander, going back to Tommy Robinson from Johnny, is Tommy anti-EU and pro-Brexit? Do you know? Has he taken?
Oh yes, he is. I mean, he's very closely associated with UKIP, so he definitely is. I mean, no question about that at all.
Okay, so he's pro-Brexit.
Yeah.
Okay. Super chat from Penguins fan. Update on South Africa, especially white Afrikaners, farmers being killed. The world is being silent on this issue. It was a big story maybe 6 months ago. It has kind of
it's faded.
I don't think the situation on the ground has changed, has it?
No, I don't think it has. In fact, I think it's deteriorating. I'm not going to pretend that I'm up to date with it. I mean, there's been so much else going on in the world that I'm not going to pretend that I'm following South Africa as closely, perhaps, as that story deserves to be followed. What I will say is that the situation in South Africa seems to be, frankly, very bad. I gather the economy isn't too strong. I gather there's more and more poverty there. I gather there's more and more crime there. And as I understand it, the government of South Africa seems to be doing what far too many African governments have done, which is that as the pressures have grown and it's failing to cope with the endemic corruption problems and with the proper management of the economy, it's radicalizing in order to keep the support of its base by turning increasingly on white farmers and people like that, who are an easy target. That's the impression I'm getting. But it may be that I'm oversimplifying the picture, and it may be more nuanced that I'm saying. I don't pretend to be up to date with the situation in South Africa. And if people want to write to us to tell us more, they're very welcome to.
But from a strictly financial outlook, from an economic perspective, Alexander, I mean, the government policy is going to demolish the economy of South Africa, correct? I mean, strictly looking at it from that aspect.
Well, so it seems
no good can come out of a policy like that.
I mean, exactly. So it seems to me. I mean, lots of things have gone very strange or wrong in South Africa. I mean, for example, gold production, which used to be so important to the South African economy, as I understand it, has essentially collapsed. Now, that may be because there's not enough gold to go on mining, which I find difficult to believe, actually. But it seems to me more plausibly it's because of systemic problems in the industry. And I think the same is happening with diamonds. And I gather that the economy overall is in a very bad way. And apparently poverty is growing and violent crime in South Africa is out of control. So, and this radicalization, which, to be very clear, is not a coherent radicalization. You're not talking about a South African government which has a clear plan to do certain things, which you may agree with or not agree with, but is doing so within an overall economic structure. It seems to me to be more a series of improvisations which are intended to, as I said, retain support of an increasingly stressed and angry popular base, but which are certain to make the economic situation in South Africa much worse.
Okay, super chat from American Rebel 27, $50 super chat. I always look forward to your streams and vids. Thanks, gentlemen. Best to Peter with your new home. Thank you, American Rebel, very much for that super chat. And from Pragwa, super chat. Alexander, how do you guys view the Indian foreign policy? Perhaps too pally with the US and Russia and Israel, and still quite transactional with both China and Iran. Another topic that doesn't get talked about.
It's a huge topic. It's a huge topic. I've written about this, and it's a subject that interests me a lot because India, to be very clear, I mean, in my opinion, there are three great powers in the world, which are the United States and China, which are the two leading ones, and Russia, which is also a third great power. The other country that has the potential to become a great power is India. I don't think it's there yet, or even close to being there, but it has that potential. And it needs, as a probable prospective great power, to maneuver very carefully between the great powers. Now, it has a difficult relationship with China, with many, many historic issues with China, and that tends to draw it closer to China's geopolitical rival and increasing adversary, which is the United States. But at the same time, I think India doesn't want to commit too much to the United States, so it retains its membership of the BRICS, and it maintains a very close relationship with China's big friend, which is Russia. So I think the Indians are conducting a balanced foreign policy. And my own view is that they're doing it with much more skill than some of their critics admit to. I think that one should not make the mistake of thinking that India has committed itself fully to the United States, or that it's a de facto ally of the United States. I think that's putting it much too strongly. I think the Indians do not want to be number two to the United States. They are working to become towards becoming a great power of their own. But as I said, that means that they have to balance. Sometimes they balance a little more to the US. Sometimes they balance a little more towards the BRICS. They always retain, and they obviously always value their connection to Russia, and they never break their communications to China entirely.
Okay, a super chat from Penguins fan. South Africa, once a beautiful and prosperous country, turns into a slump. Thanks to ANC, communists in blackface Union of South Africa was way better. Okay, well, thank you, Penguins fan, for that super chat. And from Bernard Hutchison, the super chat. Alexander, so is potential death sentence okay for Tommy? That is the fear, that he will, that he is in danger as he enters a prison. But I have a question on top of this super chat. Don't they treat, and this actually also goes in line with Assange, I guess you could say, don't they treat high-profile prisoners like this? Don't they put them in isolation, or do they put them with the general populace?
Well, if we're talking about Assange, I mean, he is in isolation, and in a form of isolation, which I don't consider is increasing his safety. In fact, to my mind, it's a serious issue and a human rights issue about the way he's been treated, because by all accounts, he's seriously ill. His health is very, very poor, and he's isolated in a way that is essentially intended to increase control over him and to prevent him communicating with his supporters. And I would regard that as a danger. Now, what Tommy Robinson has said is that if he goes to prison, the ordinary prisons in Britain are full of people who are almost by definition going to be hostile to him. Many Muslim men in British prisons now, and he could potentially be violently assaulted. And I have to say, people do die in British prisons, mostly from suicide. I think I did a study some years ago, and if my memory is about right, it's about 50 people die in British prisons every year. As I said, mostly from suicide, but serious assaults do happen. And occasionally, I mean, there have been occasional murders also. I think a person of Tommy Robinson's high profile would certainly get protection if he was sent into a British prison. So I wouldn't be worried for him in that respect. I think he's over dramatizing, but then he's a politician, and why shouldn't he?
Okay, from Gobarwal Alexander, what does Mercurius think of Trump's asinine go back tweet for the 4 US Congresswomen? It is unbecoming of a leader, let alone we have the First Amendment.
Well, I think that's probably correct. And I also think that politically, and this is always the thing with Trump, it's more astute than his adversaries, his political critics, understand. Donald Trump breaks all the rules. He says outrageous things. What he said was outrageous. But from his point of view, it's politically effective because it forces the Democratic Party to rally around these 4 Congresswomen. And at the same time as Donald Trump is arguing that these Congresswomen are somehow anti-American, whereas he loves the United States. He's also able to point out that these 4 Congresswomen have a very radical economic and political and social agenda, more radical than most Americans have. So, you know, outrageous maybe, unbecoming possibly, politically effective definitely.
There is a method to his madness. I mean,
there is always a method to it.
There's a method to the madness, and I think Trump accomplished a lot of things. I was watching a Tim Pool video on this, Alexander, and the one thing that I think everyone agrees on, even the left, even Vox News did a post on this, a story on this, is that Trump has successfully gotten Nancy Pelosi to back these 4 individuals that are really not, outside of Twitter, are really not that popular in mainstream America. They're not very well liked. And he got Nancy Pelosi to back them. But the other thing that Trump did, and Tim Pool pointed this out, is that Trump managed to draw the attention on this Twitter spat that's going on while he's passing new immigration and asylum laws. And so no one's talking about that, which would have been front and center if he didn't send that tweet. So, I mean, you know, you can call it 4D chess if you want, but there is Trump, and we've said it over and over, Alexander, I'd like you to comment this. Trump is no dummy. He is very, very intelligent, especially when you're dealing with communications, media, and marketing.
Yes. He has a flair. He understands his electoral base extremely well. And he also understands people beyond his electoral base. I mean, he understands that, you know, the 30% of Americans who are not particularly affiliated with any particular political party, and whom he has to win over in order to get re-elected, don't like these 4 Congress people, the squad. And what he does, outrageous as I said, as it may be, unbecoming as it may be, always in the end advances his ultimate objective, which is at the moment to gain re-election and to box in and to trap his political enemies, the Democrats, onto the territory where he is best able to attack them. And I find it very, very strange, actually, that time and again he's able to get away with it.
They fall for it every time.
They fall for it all the time. Exactly. I mean, you know, by now, after what, you know, the debacle of what happened in 2016, they should have realized what the game he plays is. I mean, even the midterms last year, to my mind, showed that when Donald Trump goes out and campaigns for particular people, they tended to win. He understands how to play this game very, very well. And the Democrats don't seem to have any way or understanding or ability to respond to it.
You want to know what the Democrats should have done? Not responded to it. Nancy Pelosi should have called these AOC +3, these 4 congressmen, just said, just don't say anything. Just let it go.
Exactly.
It would have come out ahead.
Exactly.
But it was so predictable.
Exactly.
It's so
yes.
easy to spot, and yet their derangement,
Yes.
their pure hate for Trump blinds them to the obvious.
Yes, yes, yes.
Anyway, all right. Let's see. Richie the Forky, I can't share this on Twitter. I don't know. If anyone else is able to share this link on Twitter, let us know in the chat. I haven't had trouble sharing videos on Twitter or Facebook, but if there is a problem, I hope there isn't a problem. But let us know in the chat if people are having problems sharing this video. And from Penguins fan, Alexander, what's going on in Greece, especially the new president elected? So disappointed at Syriza.
Well, I think we're all very disappointed at Syriza. I mean, I should say I was always very, very skeptical of Syriza. Way back in 2014, when they looked like they were going to become, they were going to be elected, I said, I do hope that if these hopes that Tsipras and Varoufakis have of renegotiating everything with the EU fails, as it will, that they have a plan B. And it turned out that they didn't have a plan B. And after calling a referendum to reject the bailout terms, Tsipras completely accepted all the bailout terms and more. And of course, he went on ever after, making one concession to the EU and the US after another, right up to the latest name change over Macedonia. So, I mean, I think lots of people in Greece are deeply disappointed by Syriza. And the result is that we've seen return to power in Greece the New Democracy Party, which is the establishment party in Greece. I mean, it is the purest expression of the Greek establishment, if I could put it like that, which of course Syriza was intended to completely obliterate. It set out to completely change and reform Greece. And instead, as I said, we've got the establishment back. Now, I'm going to say this, and this may not be popular with a lot of people. I am very glad to see the back of Tsipras. I'm very glad to see the back of Syriza. Seeing the end of Syriza, and I predict, by the way, that Syriza will now disintegrate, because now that he doesn't have the government machine working for it, I think its popularity, its residual popularity, will crumble. Opens finally a space on the left for a real opposition to emerge there. And in the meantime, my own instinct is that the new Mitsotakis New Democracy government, because it's got great experience of running Greece, will run it better than Tsipras did. I mean, they may not carry out the kind of radical change that Tsipras promised, but they will stabilize things, and they do need to be stabilized.
Well, they can't really do much, Alexander, can they? I mean, Tsipras is pretty much signed. I mean, he signed away Greece till 2060 with the loans until 2119, I believe.
That's right.
With the private funds for any revenue generated from assets in Greece. I mean, there's not much.
There's not much they can do. But I mean, government has two parts. One is policy, and the other is administration. The policy, as you rightly say, I don't think they can change very much. But the administration, they might be able to. I mean, we might have better people running things, or at least more efficient people running things than we've had up to now. And frankly, that would be a change for the better, because the administration in Greece is terrible. Right.
Tsipras did a lot of damage.
He did.
A lot of damage to Greece that people may not even realize, but he did a lot of damage.
There was I think we were both in Greece when it happened, which was last year, when there were the wildfires, which burnt and killed lots of people. 100 plus people. They spread to a community, and the universal feeling was that the government machine simply wasn't fit for purpose at that time, and it wasn't. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, it failed, and it failed badly. And what I hope I can do no more. I hope that Mitsotakis and his people, having perhaps more understanding of the way things work, will make things like that work better.
Man, I see a lot of people in the chat, Alexander, they're talking about the incompetence of socialists and communists. But the funny thing is, being in Greece, is that the Communist Party, the KKE, and many of the left-wing parties, outside of Syriza, were scared to death. And we've said this many times. We're scared to death about Syriza coming to power, because they knew Syriza was so incompetent that once they started to govern, another left party would never govern for the next 50 years, because they would do such a bad job. So even the left, the communists and the left parties knew that Syriza was a complete joke, and they were scared to death of the way they were going to govern, how they were going to tarnish the name of the left.
Exactly. And I would add, having seen the old Greek Communist Party, the KKE, in action in places like Piraeus and places like that, that in terms of the things they did themselves, so when they organize things very efficiently. I mean, Tsipras and Syriza did nothing efficiently. They were terrible, both in organizing their own events and, of course, in the general administration of the country.
That's right. And Prince Hector of Troy says 82.5% taxes in Greece. Yeah, it's the taxes when you add everything up is around 75%. It's awful.
It's awful, awful. And what it has done is it's spread corruption, because a lot of people, of course, who before were not evading their taxes, were obliged to start evading their taxes. If you go to Greece, everything above a certain level now is done with cash under the table. I mean, Tsipras and Syriza came along to end that. And a lot of people wanted to see it end, because we already had too much of that before. And what Tsipras did is he made it worse, not just a little worse, much worse.
All right, so Alexander, you have another 10, 15 minutes, because there's one topic that I really want to get to. And I think you're just the man to talk about it, because we did a video on this.
Yes.
It was a really good video. It got a lot of views. And the story is that Deutsche Bank is sliding even further downhill. Davo B says, any thoughts on Deutsche Bank? And Teleprime says, DB looks to be quite the trouble. Alexander, we did a really good video on this.
We did.
Things have not improved. You've been saying for a while that Deutsche Bank is a big mess. A big mess.
It's a big mess. And in fact, I was actually reading, I think it was on Zero Hedge, that about $1 billion has been pulled out of Deutsche Bank every day at the moment. Now that seems extraordinary, and one wonders whether it can possibly be true. But it does seem as if this bank is, by every conventional measure now, insolvent.
And please address if it will fail, what it means for the EU. Try to give us a big picture.
I mean, exactly. Now, Deutsche Bank is the key investment bank in Germany. I mean, the Germans, who used to have a financial system that was very concentrated on, very focused on servicing the German economy, specifically the German economy, decided to get involved in big investment banking, and they decided that Deutsche Bank would be the bank that would do this, and that it become a kind of German a Goldman Sachs. And of course the Germans had no real idea how to do this, and they didn't have the skill that Deutsche Bank did. And Deutsche Bank, the Goldman Sachs has, and the result of the Deutsche Bank is in a very, very bad way now, because, as I said, it has never really recovered from the 2008 crisis. It was already in bad way before then, and the European response to the 2008 crisis has been worse, in fact, much worse, if that's possible, than the response in the United States and Britain has been. So the result is that we have banks, the banking system in Germany, which has never really been sorted out. And we have a chancellor in Angela Merkel who's never shown any real interest in sorting it out. because she doesn't want to do the major structural change in Germany that Germany desperately needs if its economy is to regain its dynamism. And we've got to understand that Germany's economy, Deutsche Bank, and the bigger European economy are all interconnected with each other. If there is a collapse of Deutsche Bank, Germany spins into crisis. If Germany spins into crisis, so does the Eurozone. If the Eurozone is in crisis, the whole EU project is in crisis. So Deutsche Bank is at the focus of this whole problem. So if Angela Merkel at this moment in time is having shaking fits, I would not be surprised if it's partly because of concerns about what's going on in Deutsche Bank. And I predict that there's going to have to be a huge bailout before very long. And who knows, can I just add this, whether the decision to bring in Lagarde from the IMF, Lagarde being somebody who's been involved in a lot of the bailouts, is partly intended to put someone in charge at the ECB who has familiarity with organizing bailouts, because Deutsche Bank is going to need one very soon.
Yeah, well, Lagarde was intimately involved with the Greek
bailout.
Is this related to Greece, Deutsche Bank? Are Deutsche Bank's troubles stem from Greece or stem from a multitude of different things?
They stem from a multitude of things, but Greece is an important part of it, because of course the reason that Greece got into so much trouble was because banks like Deutsche Bank, after the euro was created, loaned to Greece vast sums of money, partly because obviously the Greeks fiddled the figures. But I have to say this, and I know this for a fact, the bankers knew that the figures were being fiddled. The reason they knew the figures were being fiddled was because people like my father, who recently passed away, were going to the banks and to the EU institutions and were warning them that they were being fiddled. They were telling them, look, I know that these figures don't make any sort of sense. And remember, Goldman Sachs was involved in helping the Greek government fiddle the figures. And it's inconceivable that what Goldman Sachs knew, the rest of the banking community didn't know. The reason they were lending money at such a prodigious rate to Greece and to all the peripheral economies was because they could make a high return on that money, and because they assumed that Germany, the big EU economy, would in the end stand guarantor for the debts of the peripheral states of the Eurozone. And of course, what happened was that they let their greed take this so far that it undermined in the end the entire stability of the banking system and of the European economy. But that was not the only thing. I mean, Deutsche Bank got involved in all kinds of things. They became very heavily involved in working with hedge funds, for example, even though Germans don't really understand hedge funds. Hedge funds are something that, people in New York and London do.
Type of thing, yeah.
Wall Street type of thing. People in Frankfurt, if you ever spend any time in the financial district in Frankfurt, it's much, much smaller. This isn't really their sort of thing, but they were involved in it and they got it all completely wrong. And what I'm hearing, by the way, is that the people who are pulling their money out of Deutsche Bank at this accelerating rate at the moment are people like hedge funds who Deutsche Bank had previously attracted to itself. So Deutsche Bank has many, many problems, and they are part of the problems of the overall German economy, which went away from a system that it had previously had of having a very high investment with high wages, with a flexible exchange rate based on the Deutschmark, and with a financial system geared to itself. It created the euro. It created this imprisoned market across the Eurozone. And of course, its banks were encouraged to go global and to speculate in ways that they didn't really understand, with Deutsche Bank at the forefront of it. And that's the problems that we're now seeing unraveling there.
Angela Merkel's legacy. Davo B4 wants to know, do you think that other banks will come to the rescue, or the US banks? Or the people?
Deutsche Bank. Of Deutsche Bank. I think the idea of Donald Trump happily sitting back whilst the US comes to the aid of Deutsche Bank, I mean, I don't believe that. I think if the US, I mean, that's what happened, by the way, in 2008. In 2008, the US Federal Reserve Board arranged huge amounts of liquidity to be made available to the European banks to help them through the immediate crisis. I think if Donald Trump sees anything like that happening again, at a time when Angela Merkel is still Chancellor of Germany, and when he feels that the Germans have taken advantage of the US through unfair exports and are not spending enough on defense, I think Donald Trump will complain loudly, and I think the Federal Reserve Board will hold back from doing it. There's going to be a bailout of Deutsche Bank, which there will have to be. It will have to be done in Europe. There are resources, sufficient resources, to do that in Germany, but Germany will pay a price, and Angela Merkel will find herself in, I think, politically very difficult problems if that's what she's facing.
All right, let's finish it off, Alexander, with a question from Jonathan. What is going on with John Major in the UK coming back to this? This is an interesting development, isn't it? We had Tony Blair. He was messing around with Corbyn, and now we have John Major back on the scene.
Well, I know, except, of course, I have to say, I mean, whatever you think of Tony Blair, and I, frankly, what I think of Tony Blair is almost unthinkable, unprintable. So I'm not going to say it. But I mean, nonetheless, he was, if you like, you know, a fairly important political figure. I mean, John Major is a complete mediocrity and a zero, frankly. So for him to come forward and now, in effect, campaign against Brexit, because that's what he's doing, and try to encourage people within the Conservative Party to rebel against the Boris Johnson government, which is coming in a few days, and to prevent that happening. That, to my mind, is just absurd. I mean, I don't think it will carry any traction at all. But it does expose, once again, the utter hostility to Brexit of every part of the British political, economic, and financial establishment. And John Major is a former banker. He still has connections with the banking world, apparently. And of course, he's a conservative, and he's a former prime minister. And he is now, I think, conclusively established as someone who is part of this British elite which wants to stop Brexit. But he's not the big figure in this. There are many, many others who are more important. If you want to know who I think is the most dangerous person for Boris Johnson at the moment within the Conservative Party, it's not John Major, it's Philip Hammond, who is the Chancellor, our finance minister, who is quite obviously manoeuvring to go onto the backbenches, and who is talking quite openly about voting against his own government in a vote of confidence on the Brexit issue.
All right, and we'll end it on that note. Alexander Mercouris, thank you very much. The Oracle of London, for a very, very good live stream, a great live stream. Thank you to Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk, for also joining us on the Duran Live 41. Alexander, what are you looking at this week? What stories are you keeping an eye on?
Yeah, what stories? First of all, I mean, there is going to be this big summit, apparently, between the Russians, the Iranians, and the Turks, and we'll see what happens there with Syria, because that's going to be the main big topic of discussion. The other big story for me is the overwhelming certainty of a Boris Johnson government in a few days, and what that government will mean for Britain, and whether he will actually move forward with Brexit on the 31st of October, as he says he will, and whether he's prepared, seriously prepared, to go for a no-deal Brexit. I think we should get a fairly clear idea of what Boris Johnson is actually going to do pretty quickly, whether he'll start, once he becomes Prime Minister, to make compromising steps, or whether he'll press forward to them. The other big event is the Ukrainian election, which is coming up fast, and we will see what happens. I think I'm mildly more optimistic about the situation in Ukraine than I was a short time ago. Because, as I said, I've now heard this personal account from a British journalist of what the situation on the ground, the feeling on the ground appears to be. And we didn't mention before that one of the big Ukrainian oligarchs, Kolomoisky, who is said to be particularly close to Zelensky, has apparently come out and given an interview in which he said that the Maidan revolution was not a revolution at all, but was a coup and a disaster. So, I mean, that's a big event, given that he was previously a big supporter of the Maidan movement. So that may be more and more straws in the wind in Ukraine. But of course, we can't be sure, and we need to see what happens after the elections. So I think those are the big stories. Now, of course, we've just dealt with what could be the biggest story of all, which is Deutsche Bank. Because, of course, if Deutsche Bank goes, I mean, the crisis that we will see in the financial system and in the European economy will be enormous. So we will see what happens. I suspect, as I said, that is the single thing that is worrying Merkel the most at the moment.
Absolutely. I think it's enough cause to give her shakes. I'd be
Well,
shaking.
I would be too in that position.
Absolutely. And Alexander, I think that you have to be corrected on your comment that the most dangerous man to Boris Johnson is Abbott. Huffman Aviation says the most dangerous man for Boris Johnson is Boris.
Well, I stand corrected. He's absolutely right.
Absolutely right. Great point. Boris Johnson is his own worst enemy. That's for sure.
Can I just show off my latest mug? As I said,
yes.
Lavrov on it. I'm really chuffed with it.
What does it say? It says we love Rov.
But I mean, I do. I think he is what, for me, a foreign minister should be. That's what I consider to be a really good foreign minister. I mean, he's an outstanding foreign minister.
All right. And Dev B4, thank you for your $20 super chat. Thanks, guys. Love your videos. Thank you, Stavo. And I also have the Russian emblem, the Kremlin emblem on my mug.
And so do I.
These are great mugs. Go to the Duran shop. Help support us. Guys, share the video. Hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed. Share the channel on Minds, on Gab. We're on BitChute. Check us out. We're all over the place, and we're trying to get to 100,000. Alexander, that's the push to get it to 100,000.
It is 100,000 subscribers.
So your help helps us.
Absolutely, of course.
Alexander Mercuris in London, the Oracle of London. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for this live stream. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your super chat. Thank you to everyone that supports us on PayPal, on Patreon, on Subscribestar. We really appreciate all the help that you guys give us, and you help keep this channel going. You help keep us active and focused on the news and getting you the best analysis that we can.
Absolutely.
Alexander, any final thoughts?
Oh, that it's entirely it's a joy appearing on our lives because we get such wonderful questions, and we hope to do more of them. And please sign on to us when we do, because it gives us this enormous drive and incentive to go on answering your questions. Right. And of course, I mean, again, I'm going to just show off my new mugs, which I love.
Yeah, that's a great mug. All right, guys, thank you very much. Have a great morning.
Well, it's late afternoon here.
Over here, it's getting to evening here. So take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.